Hi, and welcome to this week's Soul of the Parsha Shiur. My name is Menussi, and each week we're delving into an aspect of the weekly portion of the Torah using the lens of Kabbalah and Chassidut, the inner dimension of the Torah. This week's Parsha is called Yitro, and we're going actually to focus on the figure of Yitro. Who was Yitro? So Yitro, also pronounced Jethro, he was the father-in-law of Moses. Moses grew up in the palace in Egypt. He ran away from the palace to the desert. And then he came across this Midianite priest. That's how Yitro is defined. He is a priest of Midian. And he becomes a household member of him. And he marries his elder daughter, Tzipporah. And later on, Yitro becomes a staunch follower of Moses. And he actually, both him and his daughter and his whole family, they all convert to Judaism. And something very interesting happens. This parasha, as we said, is called Yitro. So he merited to have a whole parasha, a whole weekly portion named after him. And not just a parasha, but in many ways, the parasha. What do I mean? I mean that this is one of the most fundamental parashot of the Torah. This is the parasha that describes the giving of the Torah and, of course, the Ten Commandments. So this is a very, very foundational moment in Jewish, and even we can say cosmic history, the revelation of the one universal God to reality through the people that he's just released from bondage in Egypt. And this is a very Jewish event. They're separated from the Egyptians. They're separated from all the other peoples. Only they receive the Torah for the time being. It's meant to be universal, but only at the end of days or towards the end of days. And so one of the biggest questions is how come that this portion, this parasha, this monumental event in which the Jewish sages likened it to a marriage between God and his people, between the Jewish people, a very intimate event. Maybe you can have people as guests, but not as the protagonists, so to speak. But then Yitro, the father-in-law of Moshe, becomes the figure to sort of headline this portion. It's called Parashat Yitro. Why Dafka? Why a convert? And why this particular convert? And what can this figure, mysterious figure, who was an idol-worshipping priest, who converted to Judaism, why does he become such a fundamental figure in this fundamental event of the giving of the Torah? And what can he teach us? What can he teach us that's also relevant to each and every one of us, whether Jew or non-Jew, when we're coming to learn, to understand what the Torah means, what it can tell us in our generation? So there's actually something very interesting, that if you look at his name, the name almost alludes to Torah, right? If you look at the word Yitro, it's 4 letters long, Yud, and then Taf, Reish, Vav. So the last 3 letters are they're the main letters of the word Torah. Torah is the same letters, Taf, Vav, Reish, and then with a Hey in the end. The final is just a suffix sort of letter. But the 3 main letters have to do with Torah. So his name somehow is connected to Torah. Another interesting thing is that we know that there is another very famous Jewish convert who also merited to be associated with the giving of Torah in a different way. And this is also very interesting. And she's not from the Pentateuch, not from the 5 books of Moses, from later on. Her name is Ruth. She was the convert during the time of the Judges, and her scroll, the scroll of Ruth, is read by Jews every Shavuot holiday, the holiday of Pentecost, the holiday of the giving of the Torah. So we have the description of the giving of the Torah in the portion called Yitro, and then we have reading about Ruth in Shavuot. Ruth has the same 3 letters that Yitro and Torah have in common, Reish, Vav, Taf. And a beautiful thing about this is if you combine the word Yitro and Ruth, so you have 2 times those 3 letters, and then you have the Yud of Yitro. That Yud equals, the numerical value equals 2 Hey. So you can say that 1 Hey belongs to the Torah that Yitro is symbolic of, and the other Hey belongs to the Torah that Ruth is symbolic of. So therefore, Yitro plus Ruth equals Torah. It's really the 2 Torahs. We have 2 Torahs. The written Torah, that's what's described in the giving of the Torah, that's Yitro, and Ruth, alludes maybe to the oral Torah, because she's from later on, from a historical figure from after the giving of the Torah, symbolic of the oral Torah that at that time was indeed transmitted orally. So that's just something interesting to look at. There's a deep connection between these two converts. The mystery is now a double mystery of two converts that are connected to the giving of the Torah, but of course we want to focus on Yitro. Another thing to say while introducing this character is that Yitro actually has 7 names. Rashi points this out at the very opening verse of this parasha. He has 7 names. We won't go into all of them, but we will go into the 2 main ones. The 2 main ones, and it's actually quite interesting that they're listed as 2 names because they're so similar. The first is Yeter. That's just the first 3 letters of Yitro, Yeter. And then the second is Yitro, the name that we all know. There are more names, Chovav and Reuel, but these are the 2 main ones, the ones that Rashi explains first. And he says Yeter Yitro is the name that he got when he converted. When he converted, and a letter was added, the letter Vav at the very end of his name. It was just added to Yeter. That is, Yeter was his name before he converted, and Yitro was his name after he converted. It's a small difference, subtle difference, but we're going to go into it. What does it mean that his name was Yeter before the conversion, when he was still practicing idolatry, and what happens when he got that extra Vav, the final letter is Vav. So again, we said that he was a priest of Midian. Who's Midian? Who are the Midianites? Where did that people come from? So Midian was actually one of the sons of Abraham. Abraham begot Ishmael and then Yitzchak, as we all know. But then after Sarah died, he had another concubine. Her name was Keturah. The sages say she was actually Hagar. He took back Hagar, and she now had a different name. She also converted. And then he had quite a few sons, and one of them was Midian. And it is said that he sent them away to the east. This is one of the traditional explanations for maybe the origin of Eastern religions and Eastern mysticism. And he said that it is said in the verse that he sent them to to east with gifts, bearing gifts, and he sent them away. And so one interpretation is that the gifts were physical; they were part of his wealth. But another explanation is that it was a spiritual gift. He gave them an impure name. That is, it was a sacred name, a name with mystical properties or powers or depth. But it was something that was considered impure regarding the kind of education that Yitzchak was supposed to receive and carry on. He didn't want this. He wanted to make this separation. So he gave them a certain power or a certain intelligence or a certain spiritual gift, and symbolized by that name, and he sent them away. And so Midian became the father of the Midianite people. And when Moses is now marrying Tzipporah, and with Yitro becoming his father-in-law, it's really kind of an elevation of one of those old sparks that came from Abraham. Abraham was blessed with having many nations follow him or come after him in the end of days. And one of his actual descendants was Midian, and now suddenly this Midianite, or a Midianite spark, as the Kabbalistic term goes, is elevated and is reunited with the true followers of Abraham. So now again, he wasn't just a Midianite; he was Kohen Midian, right? The very first verse of the parasha is Vayishma Yitro Kohen Midian, and Yitro, the priest of Midian, heard. Yitro, the priest of Midian, and the father-in-law of Moshe, he heard. That's actually the first word. Vayishma Yitro. He heard everything that God did to Moshe and to Israel, getting them out of Egypt. And so we'll get to what he heard in a minute. But him being a priest of Midian means he was a very high figure, a very authoritative figure, and a leader, and not just leader, but a religious leader, right? So he was the top of the pyramid in Midian, a very high figure. It means he was also an expert in idolatry. So this is also something very fascinating. Moses, of all people, is marrying the daughter, not just of a Midianite, and has her converted, but the daughter of the most important Midianite, the priest of their idolatrous religions. Now, the fact that he was heavily into idolatry, into what avodah zarah, as we say in Hebrew, connects with something that he says a few verses down the road, as we're getting into the parasha. So again, the first is that he heard about the miracles that happened, and then he comes to Moshe and he brings Tzipporah and his two grandchildren, the daughters of Moshe and Tzipporah, along, and they hug and they kiss and they get together, and then Moshe tells him about all the details of the miracles that happened to them, the 10 plagues and the opening of the Red Sea and the water, the sweetening of the water, the producing of the water from the stone, and the war with Amalek. And he heard this generally, but now he's getting the details. That's something, again, we're going to go into. And then, after all this description, Yitro says, Ata yadati ki gadol Hashem. Now I know that Hashem is greater. Hashem, the Jew, is the God the God that's revealed himself to you, Havaya, whose name means was, is, and will be, this eternal God, he's greater than all the other gods. How do I know this? I know this because the very thing that the Egyptians planned to kill the Israelites with, they died in the very same way. They drowned. They tried to drown the Hebrews, and they drowned themselves. And this somehow convinces him that there is something different here. And then he says something very incredible. He says, actually he says this one verse before this, he says, Baruch Hashem, asher atzil etchem miyad Mitzrayim miyad Paro. Blessed is Hashem, blessed is God, thank God, blessed is God, that he saved you from the hands of the Egyptians. And now what's interesting about all this, again, is that we said he was a priest of Midian, and Rashi, the main interpreter, says not only was he a priest of Midian, when he says the verse, now I know that your God, that Hashem, is greater than all the other gods, how can he know that he's greater than all the other gods? Has he checked? Has he researched into all religions? So Rashi says, yes, מלמד היה שמכיר בכל עבודת אלילים שבעולם, שלא הניח עבודת אלילים שלא עבדה. It teaches us, this verse, that he knew, he recognized, or he acknowledged, or he actually knew all the different idolatrous religions, which basically means all the religions in the world, because Christianity and Islam haven't come into the world yet. He knows all the religions in the world, and not only that, not only did he know them, לא הניח עבודת אלילים שלא עבדה. He didn't let one practice go by or rest without actually experiencing it. So he practiced all religions. He didn't just know all the religions. And actually, there's two parts of Rashi actually tell us two things. He studied the theology or the mystical doctrine of all the religions, and he also practiced all the religions. And after experiencing all of this, he said, now I know that Hashem is greater than all the gods. Right? And he decided to leave all this. And this is quite amazing. So again, he's this great priest. He experienced all the religions. He came to Judaism. He merited to have the portion of the Torah describing the giving of the Torah that is under his name. And also he has another big merit. He's the first ever to say the phrase Baruch Hashem. Baruch Hashem has never been uttered in the Torah by any Jew, by anyone, before. Just these two words. These are the two words that every Jew uses dozens of times a day. It's every time you say this. How are you? Baruch Hashem. How are you doing? How's business? Baruch Hashem. It's something every Jew says all the time. It's told of the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Chassidut, that the first thing he did when he started revealing himself to the world is just to go up to people and ask them how they are, so he could hear Baruch Hashem and have many people say as much as possible these two simple words, Baruch Hashem. So it's like the most Jewish thing in the world, right? Every time, how are you, Baruch Hashem? And the first person to say this is this non-Jew who's now converting. And it's actually, one of the interpreters say, it's almost a shame to Jews that no one has ever said this before. We have this million of people coming out of Egypt, and they're not uttering this word. So again, this is a very, very deep figure. We can say what made him now a believer, right? We said that he heard something. So Rashi says he heard about two things. He heard about the miracle of the Red Sea, and he heard about the war with Amalek, but he only became a believer when he heard the details. What happened when he heard the details? When he heard all the details, he realized something very interesting, and that's maybe the key, or one of the keys to understanding everything that's going on here. He said, "Badavar asher zadu alehem," the very thing the Egyptians planned to do, they ended up having the same thing. They died by drowning. That's what modern people, or I don't know where the expression comes from, but that's what's called poetic justice. When he heard that the Egyptians were trying to drown all the Hebrews, and they actually ended up drowning, he realized there's poetic justice to the universe, and we can say if there's poetic justice, there must be a poet. And that was something that was somehow novel, new to Yitro. He knew all the religions, all the mystical doctrines, and he compared them and he practiced all of them. But there's something about this kind of poetry to the world, and there being poetic justice, which must be more than something like karma, which he must have known about. That made him. It's not just a sort of cause and effect, or things that happen to you for a reason. It's saying that there's like a poet pulling the strings and making sure that there's justice. It's poetic justice that's handled in the world. So again, this is a very momentous event, the fact that he has all these merits. And in fact, the Zohar says something really incredible about Yitro. The Zohar says, Ad levater de'ata Yitro, only until Yitro came, and I'm going to translate from the Aramaic of the Zohar, and thanked God and said, now I knew that Hashem is greater than all the gods, and Baruch Hashem, that He saved you. Only then did the Kodesh Baruch Hu's Yekari, that is His respect, His honor, His grandeur, the fact that He's so elevated, that He's so great, was revealed, went up. Hashem's honor, Hashem's value, dignity, was elevated and revealed both above and below, and only after this event could the Torah be given in wholeness, in completeness, because only then was Hashem's shilton, his power over everything, was revealed. So this is even more momentous than all the other things, that the Zohar says that the Torah could not have been given to us. The reason this whole thing is happening is described in the beginning of the portion that's going to lead up very soon to the dramatic event of the giving of the Torah, with the lightnings and the thunders and the fog and the 10 commandments being uttered with everyone hearing, at least the two first commandments coming out directly from Hashem's mouth, or so to speak. We have this convert, this former idolatrous priest, who's acknowledging this, and he's saying that, and the Zohar says, only with this elevation that he caused in the revelation of Hashem's power, omnipotence, or omnipresence in the world, was the Torah, could we receive the Torah in fullness. So there's something about Yitro that embodies, in a way, the power, the ability of the Baal Tshuva. Here it's more than a Baal Tshuva, it's a ger, someone who comes to the Torah, to faith, from afar, to elevate a spark, to raise something up. There's a very famous foundational verse in Kohelet, the book of Ecclesiastes, where King Solomon is saying, וראיתי אני שיש יתרון לחוכמה מן הסכלות כיתרון האור מן החושך. I have seen that there is an advantage, and I'm stressing this word because it's almost identical to Yitro. Yitaron is advantage, and Yitro is his name. We just have an extra nun at the end, but that's not an essential part of the word. I've seen that there is an advantage to wisdom over foolishness, just as there is an advantage to light over darkness. And the Zohar very famously said that when we're talking about this verse, the advantage of light over darkness, it can also be read as the advantage of light from darkness. And then it's interpreted as saying that the light that comes from darkness, that comes when you encounter darkness and you confront it and you manage to convert it into light, then that light is much higher than the first light that you had. There's an advantage to light that comes from the darkness by virtue of the darkness. The darkness contained within it the potential light that's higher than a regular light. So the same thing now we can say about the first half of the verse. And again, the word that repeats in both of them is Yitron, referring to Yitro. The first part is that there is an advantage to wisdom over foolishness, that is to wisdom from foolishness, the wisdom that comes from foolishness. And then the explanation goes that the particular word used for foolishness here, there are several words, there are all kinds of stupidity, but one of the words is, and the word used here is sichlut. Sichlut means foolishness, but it can also, with a very tiny change, can also refer to sechel, haskala, intelligence, education, and wisdom. So the idea is here that we're talking about Yitaron, Chochma min sichlut, we're not talking about wisdom over foolishness, really. We're talking about divine wisdom, a wisdom of faith, its advantage over regular wisdoms that are very, very wise, but compared to a faithful wisdom, a wisdom of faith, they are as foolishness, but they're really very, very clever and deep. So the idea is that Yitro, being such an intelligent, widely read person who we can even maybe say he was the founder of comparative religion, right? He studied all the religions and also practiced them. And so he knew all the wisdoms in the world in many ways. But then he from taking all the wisdom that he had and moving from that to the Torah and to Emunah, enabled him to elevate. There was an advantage to his wisdom. There was something that he could realize and see more than Jews, more than the Hebrews who were in the game from the beginning. The fact that he was able to study all the religions and then come from that to Judaism gave him a yitaron. There is an advantage to the wisdom that comes from the secular wisdoms over a regular wisdom of someone who grew up with that wisdom. So the fact that he could take this advantage, this yitaron ha-chokhmah mitoch ha-sichlut, the education that he had before, he is the epitome of this idea, of this elevation. Okay, so now we want to go more deeply into understanding this figure and what really all this means. What did he take? What did he do when he studied all the religions and somehow elevated them? What was going on there? What were all these religions that he studied anyway? And how did he study them? And how did he practice them? And how can we understand this? And again, we want to make this relevant for our generation, in which very few people that we know in the Western world are actually idol worshippers. And even those from the West, or from Israel, many Jews every year, they go to India. India has idolatry all over the place. In every street corner, every house, there's a tiny temple. You can see actual idols, just like a few millennia ago. But even then, the people from the West who go there, they're not really interested in idolatry. Idolatry isn't appealing to any modern person today. They are interested in the spiritual traditions, the mystical traditions, the doctrines, the ideas, the meditation, the yoga, the things that are more abstract and more deep and that touch the soul in a deeper way than giving food to some statue. So we want to understand idolatry also in a deeper way. We want to really abstract the concept of idolatry and reach something deeper than that. So we'll start with this, right? Rashi said that he experienced he acknowledged or knew or learned every avodah zarah in the world. What does this mean? Kol avodah zarah, all the idols, all the religions. What does it even mean? So we can really understand this in two ways. We can understand the word all the avodah zarah, all the idols, all the avodah zarah traditions in a horizontal way and in a vertical way. If we talk about horizontal, we're talking about just many, many different traditions, many different idols, many different systems. That's usually how we read or understand or imagine that when we're told that Yitro knew and practiced all the Avodah Zarah in the world, we imagine that he went from one group, one community, one tradition to another, and he checked them all out, and he practiced them, and he sort of experienced their different flavors and their different powers or the different ideas and so on. This is a horizontal, again, comparative religion. He studied all the religions and he compared them. But there's something about going over this horizontal plane, because different religions, they contradict one another. They're sometimes they go along with one another. We can say that this God is local, and another locale, another place has a different God, or different time of year, and so on. But often they also contradict one another, and then they really somehow they may cancel each other out. And this leads us to a different reading of this saying that he knew and practiced all the Avodah Zarah in the world. This leads us to a vertical understanding of what all of Avodah Zarah means. When we're talking about a vertical dimension, we're talking about levels going higher and higher of what Avodah Zarah really is. It's not a horizontal. It's not a just comparing different religions. It's trying to understand all the religions all together in a deeper and deeper and more elevated and more subtle and more spiritual ways. And when we're told that he knew and practiced all of Avodah Zarah, we can read this also, meaning that he went deeper and deeper and deeper. And that's something interesting about his name, right? His name, even before he converted, was Yitro. Yitro means, it's the root of advantage, as we said before, Yitron. It's the root of the word more, right? Yoter in Hebrew. Yoter is actually identical to Yitro. It has that vav. And leyater is to add, so adding, going more. From the very beginning, even before he converted, he wanted more. He wanted more and more. He wanted to go, first, it was all about knowing all the different traditions, but then once he knew them all, and he realized that they have canceled, when religions cancel each other out, then the more external or particulars, they sort of fall off because they contradict, but you also have you see what they have in common. You see that all religions and all mystical systems have something in common. There was this philosopher in the West whose name was Aldous Huxley, and he wrote a book called The Perennial Philosophy. Perennial philosophy, a perennial is usually said about trees that are evergreen, that they're green all throughout the year. And he was speaking about something that's eternal and universal about all religions. So he went and studied many, many different religions, and then he said, let's see what they all have in common. Let's take some kernel ideas. Let's get rid of all the particular, baggage or wrappings or whatever they have, because that's obviously culturally dependent. But if you let them cancel each other out, you're left with a perennial philosophy. And this is something more universal and deep about human nature and about the world, maybe. And maybe if all the mystics say this, there must be something to it. So this is really, Aldous Huxley was going in the footsteps of Yitro. We can say Yitro experienced first all the different traditions, and then he started going deeper into what they all mean. And he tried to find the unity, the mystical kernel, atomic or foundational ideas and concepts that they all have in common. And then, so meaning, when you go up, it's not idolatry anymore. It's idolatry only at the bottom of the ladder, of the vertical ladder. Down there, it's idols. But then you go one step up, those idols are symbolic of, let's say, certain archetypes or forces, psychological forces, cosmic forces. And then when you go even higher than that, maybe it's symbolic of something even more subtle. Maybe it's not just archetypes, it's different perspectives of looking at the world. And then you can also say, we're going even upward, that it's not really a plurality. Maybe it does come from one source. And he went higher. He wanted more and more all the time, even before he converted. And he went up. This actually really goes along with what we know from the Rambam, Maimonides, about how idolatry came into the world. According to the Maimonides, he gives this whole description in the beginning of Ilchot Avodah Zarah, all the different laws that deal with Avodah Zarah. He says Avodah Zarah started in the third generation of humanity, the generation of Enosh, and he said it started with a small error, which then became more greater. It sort of snowballed. So he says it started with everyone Adam and his son and grandchild, they all acknowledged Hashem. Hashem revealed himself to Adam and spoke to him. And they knew that there was one God, but they made the mistake of thinking that if this God has servants, if you happen to be invited to a certain palace, and the king is there, and you can see the king, and you can see that even the servants of the king, they dress, they're dressed well, and they look important, and the ministers, and they're all there, and you feel that you want to give a tip to the servant, but it's really inappropriate in the palace because he's well paid for, and you don't have to take care of him, and you have to only look at the king. So the mistake of the first idolaters was, so to speak, to tip the servants. They gave a tip to this. They said, well, there is one God, but his servants are also very important. Let's also serve them. The Rambam describes 4 stages of it, like a deterioration, a degradation that leads to idolatry. So the first is this mistake: there is one God. We should also pay something or give something to the servants. The second was that people started inventing different details, mythologies, and rituals of how to serve each. It became sort of more, it got a life of its own more. And then the third stage was people pretending or presuming to be prophets that actually had this kind of, they could channel or they have the direct channel to one of those particular deities, and he told them to do even more detailed rituals or ideas and so on. And then the fourth and final stage, because we see that Hashem is receding into the background, is that they forgot all about Hashem, and then it became polytheism. But the Rambam also says, but all those stages still exist. So the why in every idolatrous religion, if you go to the top, you go to the ashram, and you go to the mystics, and they know that there is one God, one source, but they allow the simpler people to still bow down before the gods, and they don't acknowledge them. You can really, really see this. In the ashram, the ashram is a big area, and you have those temples with the idols and the incense and everything. But then in the classes, they say, it's really nonsense. It's really all one. You have to experience this unity, connect to this unity, peel off all the layers of your identity and your need for idols or any kind of or anything else, and connect with this mystical ground of all being, which connects us all. So those 4 stages, if they still exist, they form a ladder. So again, the Rambam describes those 4 stages as a degradation, as going down. But Yitro, after he checked out all the religions and started going up this ladder, right? He started with different. The first level was the 4th stage of the degradation that Maimonides described. So what he started out, he's going in the opposite direction of what the degradation process of Maimonides. So he's starting with there being only idols and no God, and then he goes up to learning from the prophets that talk about what those gods tell them, and then he goes up to saying that they're part of, they serve one God, but they have this very particulars about them, and then he transcends those detailed concepts and stories, the mythological stories and rituals, and then it gets to there being one God with many different servants, many different appearances, many different faces, or many different masks. Right? This is very, very similar to what people like Jung talked about, that when he spoke about the masks of God. There's one God with many different masks, and the religions are all these masks. Now we can actually go one step further. And we can say, with the Maimonides, when he was describing those 4 stages of degradation, that was going from the top down, from a state of faith in Hashem to 4 stages of deterioration. But we can say that also when you're coming from the bottom up, like Yitro was, you reach a 5th stage that the Rambam didn't describe, but it's not a stage of faithfulness. It's close, but it misses something out also. But we can call it the 5th level, or the 5th stage of idolatry, which is so far away from the how idolatry is manifested in this world that it almost appears to be the very opposite of idolatry, but is still somehow something you need to let go of. Again, Yitro wanted more and more. And also something very important that he said, Ata yadati ki gadol Hashem mikol olam. Now I know that Hashem is greater than all the gods. Rashi says, I knew God before, but not as much as I know Him now. I had an experience of the one God. I knew that He was greater than all the gods to a certain level, but not to the level that now I understand. So now we want to understand what is this fifth level. The idea that this level is this going up from there being one God with different faces is like the fifth level that Yitro may have experienced going from the bottom up, was of a mystical unity, a God that's totally abstract, that's totally beyond the world, and that compared to which all of this reality is just one big illusion, like one big dream. So this is a movement of Ratzo, the danger, right? There are two movements to the soul. The soul moves across this ladder in two directions. Going up is called Ratzo, it's called running. The soul, once it remembers or connects to its source, it wants to run up there and merge with godliness. And this is called Ratzo, the run of the soul upwards. And the other direction, when Maimonides was describing the degradation, that's something in the line of that direction, is called Shov. Shov is returning. It's called running and returning. Yitro is now running. He's on the run. He wants more and more. And he left all the idols behind, and he's going upper and upper. And then he may have reached the level that we all know from different mystical systems all over the world, was that of a kind of unity, a kind of godliness that appears to be all one. It's beyond all the details. You have to shed all the different details and attachments that in the world. And then you reach this state that's like in a state of ecstasy, or in a state of meditation, in a state of you experience the unity, the oneness of everything. And from that point of view, you then experience all of the world being almost like an illusion. So we can suggest this because we know this from the world. And we know that it exists in traditions that on the outside appear completely idolatrous. But then when you look inside, they appear to be so monotheistic, so to speak, or so all about oneness, that actually when they talk about Judaism, Judaism is dualistic. It's so dualistic. Because why? Because we see creation as real. But we, say those mystics, have transcended that understanding, and we're not dualistic, we are monistic. We're saying we are more monotheistic than you Jews. That's what they say. They say we know there's actually one, everything is just one. And if you give a reality, if you see what you experience as reality as really real, you're missing something out, because then you're buying into the plurality of appearance of things, and that goes along with distinguishing between groups and between different foods or asur and mutar. That all becomes so too solid. They have it also, but it dissolves into this mystical experience of oneness. And we can say, if we're told that Yitro knew and practiced all of the different avodah zarah, and we're interpreting all in the vertical sense of going up this ladder, we have to say that he got even all the way up there to this experience of total unity, of the highest philosophers and mystics of all the different religions, the pinnacle of the perennial philosophy that all religions have in common. In fact, the Lubavitcher Rebbe says, when he's talking about the title, Kohen Midian, the priest of Midian, he says, this isn't degradatory, it's a compliment. The Torah is complimenting him. They want to say he went to the top. And since we know that this is the top, we can say that he must have gotten there. And of course the fact that, and now this, going all the way up to the vertical understanding of all avodah zarah, and the previous, more simple, more straightforward interpretation that we're talking about horizontal avodah zarah, it doesn't contradict at all, because like I said, in those ashrams, those mystics and philosophers, they talk about unity, but just outside the room, you have people giving gifts and flowers and food and to those, and incense to those different idols. So there's no contradiction, because they say, well, since it's all an illusion anyway, it doesn't really matter if people bow down to some idol. Maybe in their next life maybe if they come to the shiur, they come to the philosophy class, they realize it's all one. But we can have all the different idols outside, thousands of different idols, because inside we know it's really all one, it's all an illusion. He was there. He was in that state, in that situation. So now, of course, the next big question is what made him convert, right? He wants more and more. He's called Yeter, but something happens to him that causes this transition from Yeter to Yitro, right? And Rashi says, Makiro haiti b'she'avar. I knew God before because don't see me as one of those simple idolatrous people who bow down before gods. Yeah, I have them in my house, but really I know it's really all one. What happens that he says, Makiro haiti b'she'avar v'achshav beyoter. I knew God before, now I know him more. And when he says I know him more, he says the word yoter, and maybe at that moment he receives the name Yitro, because Yoter is the exact same letters of Yitro. The Vav added to Yeter turns Yeter into Yitro. So now what changes him? What changed him? He got to the top. And again, from their point of view, they say Judaism is dualistic. It's going down. It's you got to the top. You know that everything is one. You has this mystical experience. You're enlightened, and you know that all is one. Why do you need to do? What do you find attractive about this religion that looks at the details of the world is so important? The details of what you eat, and the hours of the day, and different places, and where the places end, where the places begin, and the different exact things that you have to say, and the exact formulation of the words and the letters. Why do you have to go to these details? You're going down. So two things happen to Yitro. The two stages. The first is the first verse of this parasha. Vayishma Yitro, Kohen Midian, he heard et kol asher asa Elokim, everything that God did to Moses and Israel, getting them out of Egypt. And here we can say called maybe means the general aspect. Probably maybe Moshe is also using the same words later on. Yeah, the word is repeated. But so the main thing is not this. The main thing is that he heard a general rumor, right? Ishma is like a rumor. The general rumor about two things, says Rashi. The parting of the Red Sea, the Egyptians drowning in the Red Sea, and the war with Amalek. So that was the first stage. When he heard that the Egyptians drowned, and that they had this fight with Amalek, which is an eternal war in a way, that made him come. But then when he heard all the details that Moshe told him about everything that happened, with the 10 plagues, and with every different miracle, and with the war with Amalek, and how they won the war with Amalek, with Moshe raising his hands over his head, that touches him in a very deep way. Why does it touch him? It touches him because he realized that this one God that he knows, he had the mystical experiences. There's something, when you have this kind of experience, a way of looking at things, then when you go back outside of the ashram or the place of meditation, you go back to the world, you're a bit distant from everything. You may love everyone to the same level. You say, I want to feel compassionate, I want to feel love for everyone. But you're also a bit distant because you don't want to take any sides, because you want to love everyone at the same time. So the kind of morality that comes down, when you translate this kind of mystical unity into a morality, you have a very, very abstract, non-committal morality of vague concepts like compassion and love to everyone. Now again, compassion and love to everyone, that's highly important. We also say this. Olam chesed yibaneh. According to most interpreters, everything in the world was created on the very first day, and that day was a day of chesed, a day of love. Chesed is the first attribute of the different attributes of the heart, according to Chassidut, Kabbalah. And first thing you should work on is love. Avraham was a person of love. Only Yitzchak, the second generation, added something called gevura, might, which gave limits to the love. But Avraham wanted to love. Avraham loved both Yitzchak and Ishmael. He was compassionate and loving for everyone. But there's something that's non-engaged. If you see a conflict, you feel sorry for both sides. You want to heal the wounded of both sides. You want to make sure there's peace there. But something doesn't work that way. Sometimes you have to take a side. That means being fully engaged in this world. You have to, if there's something evil in this world, the root may be very good and high, and that's why you want to feel compassion. But there's something, if all this unity is really one, it means all the particulars are part of this oneness. And then going down into this level of particulars means like really taking them seriously and engaging with the world may also mean, right, if you go into the world of details and different groups and different identities and different conflicts, and you really treat seriously the different details because they're all part of this unity, right? If you want to go more, if you got all the way up to the unity, the only way to go further, the only way to go beyond this infinite mystical unity is to go back down into engaging particularly with the particulars. And going into the particulars means also, if there's a conflict, saying that maybe one side is more right than the other side. And maybe one side is not just more wrong, it's actually really wrong, it's actually really evil. And maybe it needs to be destroyed like Amalek. So now the first thing that he heard, that the Egyptians drowned the ability of this one God that he thinks would be loving and compassionate towards everyone. The fact that he was able to create a people and then also to make them drown. And then with Amalek even more than that he created them because it's all part of him. But he's able to be so engaged, so committing to giving us a certain kind of morality or a compass, a moral compass, to lead us through this world, that he's actually able to tell us, so this people, I created them, and they're also, by the way, descendants of Abraham and Yitzchak, Amalek. They're not distant relatives, they're relatively close relatives, but they've become evil. And now they embody this kind of evil, and we need to fight them, we need to destroy them. And this made an amazing impression, because he got on Yitro, he had an impression that the more high you go, the more all the identities dissolve. And that maybe going even further, right? I can tell you that I had this experience. I before doing tshuva, before arriving at Judaism, I was like Yitro. I was comparing different religions, tasting, experiencing different religions, practices. And I believed in a God that was very universal, very abstract, but I couldn't really believe in there being a personal God that cares about individuals or that listens to their prayers. But then something happened, and it's a story for another time. But the insight that I got from that experience was suddenly a very, very. How could I relate to the concept of a personal God? It happened when I suddenly realized that I always thought that it's too little or too much of a nuisance for this universal God of mathematics and philosophy and mysticism to care about different prayers, individual prayers. Why should he listen? And why should he take an interest in puny things? And what does he have, like 7 billion or 8 billion, different people to pick up the phone, secretaries? And but then I realized, no, because he's so great, it's something even greater than being so abstract and universal. Something even greater than that is going down back into the world and listening to all the different prayers, and listening and caring about the details, and also being able to be judgmental about the details, saying this is right and this is wrong, and I'm choosing these people to give them the Torah, and maybe I'm choosing other people that they don't yet have the Torah, and maybe there's some other people, so for them I want them to just have morality, and then there's some other people that I think are really enemies, and because if the details are also contained within this universal oneness, it's greater than just this abstract oneness, right? So when you're looking for more, you want more subtle, more high, more spiritual, more universal. But then you got all the way to the top. You're experiencing all the world as one unified light. But then the only way to go further beyond that is to go back down and to experience this one God, this godly unity as taking full responsibility for the world, and again, all the way down to taking really taking a side. And if you think about the vav, that extra vav that Yitro got, making him from Yeter to Yitro, vav, when you actually draw, vav is just one line, and you draw it from you start with the vav and you go down. So the extra vav that he got is actually symbolic of the God's light descending into the world. The vav was that it suddenly clicked that the coin fell, right? An image that maybe young people don't understand, but old phones, you put a coin and it fell down. So sort of the coin fell into his heart, from his head to his heart, that the one God, if you really want to make him one, he should be engaged and with the details all the way down to be able to point at enemies. So just hearing about the Amalekites and the Egyptians made him come, and then hearing about the details that Hashem did 10 different plagues in 10 different ways, and the way they won over Amalek, and maybe even their relationship between Amalek and the Jewish people that goes all the way back to Yitzchak and Esav, Yaakov and Esav, and all these details of the Torah, when he suddenly heard a different kind of spiritual class. It wasn't all about shedding the details, transcending the details into this unity. It was about seeing how Hashem reveals himself in this myriad, I don't know how it's pronounced, all these different details. And that says now, wow, Baruch Hashem, this God is even greater. That I knew before that there was a God that's greater than all the different gods, but now I appreciate it to a higher level, to a higher extent, because now I see it going back down into all the details. And that, by the way, fully rectifies and elevates the whole experience of wanting to have a different idols, because wanting different idols, the fact that people care about this and that particular deity is because they want details. They want different particular faces and aspects of reality. They want to acknowledge them. But it's such a coarse, external degradation of what Hashem is that it's one of the biggest things that's forbidden in Judaism. So you do have to shed it. But after you shed those different masks of the different idols, and you realize that one unity of Hashem, that's why Yitro is so important, that he could realize it. But then you go back down, the details become again important as different, like features in the hidden face of God. It's not masks of God. It's the actual different features of the hidden face of God that you can't see them, but that face shines at you through those different particulars. And again, it really has to do with taking a side in a war. There's an idiom, very important idiom said by Chazal, that they said, "Kol hamerachem al achzarim keilu mitachzer lerachmanim." He who pities the cruel, it's as if he was cruel to the pitiful. He who shows mercy, it's in another way, he who shows mercy to the cruel, it's as if he's cruel to the merciful. That's an amazing sentence, and it sort of goes against the grain of this kind of universal spirituality that leads you to a very abstract and really shallow morality of just compassion for everyone. And he says compassion isn't for everyone. Some people are cruel. And Hashem is so great that he was able to create actual cruelty in the world. And when that thing exists, it doesn't matter if the source is divine. Because down here, reality isn't an illusion, it's real. And down here, cruelty is real. And the Egyptians and the Amalekites were cruel. And if you show compassion and mercy to those Amalekites and to those Egyptians, then it's as if you're cruel to the merciful. Why? Because then if you adopt the stance of, let's say, non-violence, or letting everyone be, and never opposing physically anything, then you're really giving them a green light to go on and doing their cruel things. And they're really going to be cruel to the merciful. And it's indirectly, and also directly to a degree, it's your fault. If you could have stopped them from being cruel, you would have saved those merciful people who do deserve to live. So this is something that on the one hand, it feels like going down, like we said before. Why you had this mystical experience when you meditated? Why go to Judaism with details, and not just the details, but this kind of differentiations that it does, and calling things bad and evil, and saying things like this, that he who shows mercy to cruel people, it's like he was cruel to merciful people. But it clicked to Yitro that this is more, this is higher, by virtue of going back down into the world and taking responsibility for the different people that you have here, and identifying the threats, right? Amalek as a people doesn't exist, but different generations have different, very cruel, very evil enemies that need to be identified, called by their names, and fought against. And if they're able to do tshuva, to return to Hashem, that's wonderful. But if they're not, if they're Hitler, or if they're ISIS, or if they're something else like this, then they need to be fought. And if you come to them mercifully, you're enabling them, just like happened just before World War II, Chamberlain enabling Hitler to amass power. And you have to be a little bit more like Churchill than Chamberlain. You have to be someone who say, well, yeah, everyone is good at heart, but this world is real, and in this world they're cruel, and now we have to stop them. If we don't stop them, we're enabling them to be cruel to merciful people. This has made such an impression on Yitro. That was what caused him to move from Yeter to Yitro. First, just the concept of this universal, abstract source of all being, God, coming down to the world and drowning or commanding us to destroy the peoples that he himself created, that he's so engaged in this world that he's able to commit to the morality that he stands by. Suddenly it clicked to him that it's a greater God. It's an even greater God than that what he thought was the greatest of all gods, because he was so abstract. And that's also one of the reasons I think that Kabbalah is, when you're talking about, like, people want to say, let's compare all mystical traditions, let's find the perennial philosophy of all different mystical traditions, and then they put Kabbalah on the same level or in the same group as different mystical systems. That's a categorical mistake, in my opinion, because while almost all mystical traditions are all about abstraction, or in Hebrew you say hafshata. Hafshata is taking off your clothes, shedding all the different details and getting to this one unity. Kabbalah, being part of Torah in general, is the opposite of hafshata, abstraction. It's halbasha, it's enclothement. It's all about how Hashem is enclothed and revealed and goes down into the details of the world. It's not about this universal unity. That's the very beginning of the Arizal's Kabbalah, is that Hashem is Or and Sof Pashut, a simple infinite light. Everything is is godliness. Hashem is everywhere. Everything is Hashem in it, is really. And that's just the first line. It's not the apex of the meditation you have to go through, which realize this. That's what you start out with. And then you start by going into the details of the world and how to live in the world and what to do and how to understand the deep meaning of everything. So really we have now, if we talked about before, about the degradation of Idol, the 4 stages that Maimonides described, starting out with one God with different servants and going all the way down. And then we talked about Yitro going back up, with the degradation of idolatry. Then we had Yitro going up to the sublimation of idolatry. He sublimated. He climbed up this ladder to ever more subtle versions of idolatry, which aren't idolatrous anymore, going all the way up to an even higher level than Maimonides described, this mystical God that has nothing to do with the world. The world is an illusion for him, and he is above everything. And then there was another act of going down, which is actually God's descent into the world to be engaged in it and take responsibility and show that there's a difference between cruelty and mercifulness and good and evil, and going into the details and revealing himself. So this is it's actually called Yerida Tzorech Aliyah, right? We know this, descent for the sake of ascent, but it's really, in Kabbalah, there's an addition. We're talking about Yerida Tzorech Aliyah, Tzorech Yerida. Every descent is for the sake of ascending higher, which is for the sake of again descending, but not descending in a way of degradation or deterioration, but in a way of taking this mystical universal light and bringing it into this world, which also means being able to be judgmental regarding this world, differentiate different details, say what is mutar and what is asur, what is permitted, what isn't, what is holy, what is unholy, what is pure, what is impure, what is good, what is evil, and so on. So this was for Yitro, the movement, the transition from Yetro to Yitro. Yetro made him go all the way up. The sublimation of idolatry into mysticism. Yitro was him going back down, and this realization, this journey that he made, was able to show the two poles of Hashem's omnipresence. The fact that he's above everything, but the fact that his light also descends all the way down, not to just being equally present in each detail, which again dissolves everything, but revealing himself in particular details. That's the only way to really go into particularism, if you have to be particular about it. Going into particulars, just like when Yitro heard the particulars, made him realize it, and choosing one particular over the other, choosing a language, choosing a people, choosing a center, choosing a moment in time which is holier than other moments like Shabbat, and so on. This paved the way. We had to have this journey. Yitro had to go through this journey in order for something to happen in the consciousness of the world, or in the consciousness of the Jewish people. They needed this convert to come into to join them, so now they're ready to receive the Torah. We'll end with just one small postscript, and then we'll end. Just after this the moment that Yitro acknowledges how Hashem is greater than all the other gods, he sees how Moses is guiding the Jewish people, and he sees that Moses is trying to be the judge of every individual case. He's judging all the different cases, and he works from morning till night. And he says, you're going to kill yourself doing this. It's impossible. You need to have a hierarchy of ministers or judges. You need to have judges for every 1,000, a group of every 1,000, and judges for a group of every 100, and for every 50 people, and for every 10 people. And you need this hierarchy that you can divide your work between different people. So, and this is an amazing advice that we know. That's one of the reasons that we say that he has this name, is that he actually added something to the Torah. But really what he's saying here is this. He's saying, because I come from a word of idolatry, because I went all the way up to this abstract, but now I'm going back down to seeing how Hashem's light filters and branches out into the world, I can tell you that now you're making, to a subtle degree, not as bad as I did, but you're making the same mistake or a bit of this, something similar to the mistake that I did when I was a mystic. I thought everything is one, and all the different details sort of can be dissolved into this one. So you're conversing with Hashem, you're a prophet of Hashem, you're in a much better state than I am. You're about to give the Torah to the Jewish people and to the world. But you're making, to a certain degree, you're making the same mistake. You're thinking that you have to be, compared to your people, a bit like a one universal or abstract God, that everyone can answer everyone. You can't, you're human. And you need to go back down, you need to found this hierarchy of different people, just like I realized that the light of Hashem he's one, but the plurality, the manifold aspects of reality are very real. They need their very particular, they need to be addressed in a very particular way. And now I can teach this to you, my son-in-law Moses, because I can identify this problem. I'm an expert. I was all about going all the way up there and not taking the details of reality so seriously. You taught me, Moses, to treat the details seriously. You told me about the details of how Hashem is running the world. Now I'm telling you, just like Hashem chose you to be his emissary, to be his messenger, you need to emulate Hashem in the same way. You need to also choose emissaries, choose people who are beneath you and who represent you and who take care of things. Hashem also chose you to be his messenger. You also need messengers, people under you. And I know this because that's my whole spiritual journey is about this. I went all the way up and now I'm going back down to take reality and time management and different particular cases that need particular, people from particular tribe to treat issues from the tribe and so on. I'm taking it far more seriously. I'm giving you now this advice. When he gives this advice, by converting first and by giving this advice, Yitro is able to elevate all of idolatry. Because idolatry is looking at the details of the world without going through this journey of descent for the sake of ascent, for the sake of redescent into the world. They're just in the first descent. They're there, enthralled by all the details, the forces of nature. He elevated it, but then you can go all the way back down and found this hierarchy that's hinted at by the Vav of his name. And he really gives this Vav also to Moshe. So this is our shiur for today. Thank you very much. Shabbat Shalom. I'm actually flying tonight to South Africa. I'm going to teach there. So next week's class, hopefully, I will be shooting this shiur from there, and I'll post it to YouTube. Shabbat Shalom Litot. Hi, if you've gotten this far, you've probably enjoyed the class. If so, please consider supporting me on Patreon. Patreon is a platform designed to help independent creators receive financial support from their followers. These classes take time and effort to make, and any amount really helps. You can check out the link to my Patreon account in the description below. Thank you.